you all for being here on this Friday morning. It's great to see your names and some faces, lots of familiar names. I always appreciate that. I think I'm just gonna get us started. I'm gonna go over the agenda for our day, but while I do that, if everyone could introduce themselves in the chat, just with your name and affiliation, and so we all make sure we know each other. And so the agenda today, we're going to start off with some announcements, and then we're going to get right to our first speaker. We have two speakers lined up. Today we've got a few more people in the waiting room, sorry. Today we've got Becky Estes with the Forest Service and Kate Gaza with Bear Yuba Land Trust. And then next we're going to have a moment of networking. Hopefully, if we have some time. I know breakout rooms are not everyone's favorite, but you never know what conversations you might have, what connections you might make, and what it will lead to. So I ask you all to stick around for that, and don't worry, you'll have a prompt. And then we'll just close out for the day and get on with our Fridays. So as I'm sure you know, start off with some announcements. As I'm sure you know, CAL FIRE has quite a few funding opportunities right now. And I just want to go over them. I heard Robin Bellows speak recently, and I don't think she's here. So she shared her slides with me. So as I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of funding opportunities offered by CAL FIRE. I just want to give a brief overview. She shared this awesome slide with me, and these boxes, you'll see the program. And the writing underneath is what they're funding. So real, just clear delineation here. For example, the Business and Workforce Development Program, which is quarterly, or accepts applications on a quarterly basis, offers training funding for training programs, capacity building, nurseries, infrastructure, and biomass. And I'll share this slide too. I'll make sure that's okay with Robin, but share this slide with everyone so you have a good understanding. And it gives you an idea of what's to come this fall as well. The forest health and fire prevention ones, well, fire prevention's due next week. Forest health is due in March. They really recommend you get in touch with the local representative. And that is an awesome service. They will give you feedback on your proposal to really make sure it's strong. And so that's highly recommended. And just a quick delineation on those two programs in particular. Forest health is all about restoration, kind of in this wildland ecological watershed area. Fire prevention being all about close to structures in the WUI, close to communities and infrastructure. And like I said, I'll share these, but this is some awesome funding opportunities, and it would be great to see some of this funding come to our region and our forests. So keep an eye out for the workshops that they host, and I'll continue to try to announce those as they come. Yeah, okay, great. I'll definitely share. So next, in terms of announcements, the Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative is kicking off their speaker series. And next week is their first one. You can all see that slide now. Their first one's next Wednesday. It's after work, 6 to 7. They're having a talk from Dr. Carrie Levine on fire behavior modeling, and these talks are lined up through May. They do require registration, but you just click on the link in the flyer to register, and I'll be sending this out with notes. This info is also on our Forest Health calendar, which is located on our Yuba Forest Network webpage. And I hope to see you there. I signed up for this one next week. It should be really interesting. And any questions should be directed to Yuba Bear Burn Cooperative's new coordinator, Cordy Craig. And she's great. Her email's down here, but it's Cordy, C-O-R-D-I, at sierraforestlegacy.org. So that's some great opportunities to continue learning, which we love. And then lastly, on my end, in terms of announcements, I wanted to just remind everyone that I am continuously updating our resources. So let me just, if you always navigate to, sorry, you can see my recipes I like to check out. If you navigate to our Yuba Forest Network page, You'll see our news and announcements. You can easily access our strategy that we worked really hard on. Give that a read. And then also our stakeholder map is here, but I do want to mention I'm working on updating this with new shapefiles. I've gotten some new shapefiles from some people here today. And this is an ongoing project that I'd like to host. And I will say I'm giving it a refresh as well. So to give a teaser, Arc Online updated their story map. So it's looking a little more professional. I'm really excited about it. So you can have our general map. And then as you scroll, you can see all the different maps we have so far. So organizing our stakeholder map, our project data by what status they're in, if they're active, if they're complete, if they're only planned, and then which stakeholders are leading which efforts. And I'd like to keep adding data, for example, so knowing where all the fires have been, things that can really help in planning projects and prioritization. So that's it on my end. I'm going to stop share and give an opportunity if anyone has announcements on their end. Now's your chance. All right, well, I don't think that's an announcement for us. I think someone's just a little maybe unmuted. That's okay. Well, hearing none, I'm gonna get us started with our first speaker. So allow me to introduce Becky Estes. She is the Central Sierra Province ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service. And she's here to talk about the Tahoe National Forest Climate Change Trend Summary, which was linked in the agenda. I'll also throw it in the chat for your reference as she presents. So Becky, if you're ready.
Yeah, I am. This is great. I've already learned a few things from just the few minutes that I joined early before my talk. So I really appreciate it. Those slides are amazing. And I had no idea about those talks. So I'm going to check those out as well. I recognize a few of those the speakers. So I'm also going to drop in the chat just the link to the Region 5 ecology page. It's not super intuitive how to get back from that documents page. So that link I just dropped in there will get you to the page before the documents, which gives you a lot more information on the different provinces and all that good stuff. So let me screen share here really quickly. Okay, so, oh wait, hold on. Like, what program am I in? Okay. Screen two. Okay. And then which view are you guys seeing? Are you seeing the full slide?
Yeah, that's what I see.
Perfect. All right, excellent. So I recognize a lot of the names on here, but just to give you guys a little bit of background on who I am. So I'm Becky Estes. I'm the Central Sierra Province ecologist with the U.S. Forest Service, and I work with the Region 5 ecology program. And so we have 5 provinces throughout California, and we have a province ecologist and associate province ecologist within each of those. And so that means we usually represent or provide support to a number of different forests within the province. And so I support the Tahoe, El Dorado, Stanislaus National Forest, and then the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit. And I've been asked to talk a little bit today about our climate change trend summaries. So these documents that the Region 5 Ecology Program has been producing aren't new. We've been doing them for a number of years. But one of the things that we recognize—
Good morning. How are you feeling?
I'm doing good enough right now.
So I think somebody might be unmuted.
Meeting with WRI?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of doing, getting my mind ready. But what did you have in mind?
I'd like to remember how to—
Sorry about that,
There we go.
Thanks.
No worries. Technology, we struggle to figure it out sometimes. Okay, so these summaries aren't new. We've been producing them for a number of years, but I think as we all know, climate science has been improving. Models that are available to us are changing at a rapid pace. And so we really felt the need to dive into these climate change trend summaries and make them more relevant to a lot of the great science that's going on out there. Okay, so essentially what's within, so what I'm basically going to do is give you a quick overview on what's in these summaries, and you have the link, you can go visit the document. There's a lot more information within them that you can dive into. So I'll just give you a brief overview of what's in it, and then I'm going to dive a little bit into some of the future climate predictions that are specifically for the Tahoe National Forest. And so within the trend summaries, you know, the basis is really you know, strongly connected to the climate in California, as well as the changing global climate. So that's all sort of built into the document. And with sort of a trickle down approach to, you know, we talk a lot about global climate change within California, and then climate change specifically within the unit on the Tahoe National Forest. So within each of the summaries, we highlight both past, current, and then projected climate change on each of the units. So if you're, you know, interested in checking out the climate change trend summary for the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, there's a separate one for that. And then within each summary, we sort of dive into effects on hydrology, fire, vegetation, and wildlife. And so that's essentially a summarization of all the current literature that exists today. Really, the summaries are meant to be updated every 5 years. And like I mentioned, even I think since we just finished these, like at the end of 2020, there's new things that have already come available. And we're like, oh, well, should we update based on this? So it's kind of a, it's interesting to produce a document like this, you know, today where we constantly have new science coming our way, which is fantastic, but it's also, you know, difficult to sort of distill it into a format that can be easily digestible by managers. Okay, so just to give everybody, I'm sure this group is very well aware of climate scenarios, but I just wanted to give you sort of a quick background on GCMs and then talk a little bit about the ones that we focus on within the report. So I think most of, you know, as I mentioned, climate science has been around a long time. You know, the GCM was first published in 1956. We've had the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, 1990. More recently, we've gotten into, you know, detailing the 3 types of emission scenarios. And then, you know, most recently, we've had the most recent IPCC report in 2021 and 2022, which is the 6th assessment. So we've had a lot of assessments over the years. And so if I'll just direct you to the figure here and see, I'm gonna bump over here so you guys hopefully can see my cursor. So I've just highlighted, and this is sort of a representation of climate change, of climate scenarios, climate models in space. And so you can see the change in temperature here and the change in precipitation. And this just sort of plots them in relation to each other. And you can see this is the congruence of all those climate models. And so we focus on 3 in particular. This model up here, which is the CNRM, which we usually refer to as our wet model. So you can kind of see that it sits above this 0 line here as far as precipitation goes, and it's sort of in the middle as far as change in temperature. And then the opposite, the bookend of those climate models, we focus on using the HADGEM, which we refer to as our hot climate model scenario, which sort of, my cursor keeps disappearing on me, which, as you can see, sits on the higher end of temperature and also a decrease in precipitation. So we sort of consider those bookends as we move through the climate modeling in the future scenarios. And then I'll just highlight the RCP scenarios over here. I think most of us are familiar with them. They essentially represent different carbon emissions. And I think, you know, for the most part, we focused on the 4.5, which is right in here. But lately, we're starting to see that the 8.5 more closely aligns with what we're seeing currently. So throughout the report, we present both of them so that managers sort of have an option. And it sort of bookends the carbon emissions that are predicted into the future. Okay, so now I'm gotta move you guys over here so I can see my screen. Okay, so future climate data. So this is available to all of you. I just want to point that out. If you've never used any of the CalAdapt tools, I have the link there. If somebody wants to drop it in the chat, that would be great. essentially it's projected future climate data, and you can model it based on any location that you're interested in. So for us, we were really interested in doing this at the unit scale. So for the Tahoe National Forest. And so the data covers 1950 to 2005 for the historical period, and then 2006 to 2100 for future climate projections. And it's all downscaled climate projection data based on the average of the 4 priority models that are identified for California. So it's the models that California has already said were a focus. They pulled those into the CalADAP modeling. When summary data wasn't available for the forest scale, there are some metrics that are more closely tied to precipitation, snowpack, things like that. It's summarized at the watershed scale. And so what we did for each of the units is we chose a high elevation and a low elevation watershed. So for the Tahoe, we looked at the lower Middle Fork, American, and then the Little Truckee River. And then all of this is summarized at 30-year periods. Okay, so I just want to jump into talking about some of the results from the report. And as I mentioned, there's a lot more in there. This just sort of gives you a flavor of some of the information that you can gather from the report, particularly focused on the future climate scenarios. As I mentioned, we do cover the comparison of current to historical. And so I highly recommend looking at that. That's based on weather station data that's been collected for over a century within all the different units. So here's just an example of looking at temperature. So this is modeled historic and future average minimum and maximum temperature. So maximum temperature, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. We use minimum temperature as sort of a way to estimate nighttime temperature. And so you can see, and I'll just give you a quick rundown, all the figures are arranged just like this. So they have the time period here on the x-axis, and then you can see in each of the panels, this is maximum temperature, minimum temperature, and then degree temperature difference in Fahrenheit. And then we also look at those 2 RCP scenarios that I mentioned. So we have the 4.5 and the 8.5. And so some of the things that we're seeing here, just, and looking at this figure, is that you can tell that over those 30-year time periods, we see just a gradual increase in temperature, both maximum and minimum. And so some of annual average maximum temperatures are projected to increase by 1.5 to 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit in the early part of the century, and about 6.5 to 10.7 by the end of the century. And that minimum temperature, which I mentioned is synonymous with annual average nighttime temperature, is projected to increase by 2.9 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit in the early part, and 5 to 12.3 degrees Fahrenheit. And one of the things what we really tried to do was put this in perspective. And so at the supervisor's office, the Forest Service office in Nevada City, the projected changes at the end of the century would equate to the average maximum temperature in July and August in Bakersfield, California. Not to scare anybody, but just to think about what those temperatures would actually feel like in today's world. Okay, and so then we also get into looking at freezing. And so this is the modeled number of days above freezing for watersheds. And so as I mentioned, in some cases, we had to summarize the data at the watershed scale and not at the forest scale. And so that's pretty clearly indicated in the figures and in the report. So you can see we have the lower watershed and the upper watershed. And the first thing you note is that the lower watershed, if you think about where it's located, doesn't have days above freezing. And so there isn't any record of that. So it's just something to note, especially for the Tahoe National Forest. And so you can see here that overall, the number of days above freezing and the number of nights above freezing are increasing at both of the watersheds and at both of the RCP scenarios. And so the magnitude of these changes, as I mentioned, is greater in the upper elevation watershed. And so in the upper elevation, the Little Truckee, where freezing temperatures are more critical to maintaining snowpack, the average number of nights above freezing increased by 83 days. And the average number of days above freezing increases by 18 days. And as I mentioned, the lower watershed doesn't have any reported days above freezing currently. within the model, but the average number of nights above freezing is predicted to increase by 28 days. Okay, so then we also dive into looking at precipitation. And so we look at precipitation just overall, and then we look at how precipitation is falling as snowpack. And so, the one thing about precipitation, and probably some of you are familiar with this within a lot of the climate models, are that it's not consistently represented within the model. Some models show an increase, some models show a decrease, some models show it not changing at all. One of the things that is consistent on precipitation is that the variability in precip is going to increase as we move further out into the century. And so you can see just by the figure here, there's not a lot of predicted change in annual precipitation across the Tahoe National Forest. Okay, and I'll get a little bit more into this, the idea of the variability increasing. We have, there's some really great modeling within CalAdapt where you can look at a simulated drought period throughout those time periods and begin to understand how those specific elements, those metrics such as temperature and precipitation, are predicted to change. But part of that variation is driven by those frequency of extreme precipitation events. And I don't really like to talk about weather, but I think we all know, those of us that survived the bomb cyclone, events like that are what's predicted to increase quite substantially. And so this large degree of interannual variability is really going to occur in those extreme events. Okay, and I think I already pointed out earlier, so there's a lot of uncertainty in the modeled future precipitation across the GCMs. Okay, and so then we also dive into snow and we look at, so this is snow water equivalent, and this is predicted by water year, because we all know California doesn't operate on a calendar year as far as when we get our precipitation. And so this is essentially showing observed, and then we have the RCPs, and this is summarized at the Tahoe National Forest scale. And so you can see across the time periods from early to late century, we have a decrease in snow water equivalent. And it's projected by the end of the century, there will be a projected decrease of about 1.7 to 3.6 inches of SWE. And really, this is due to that decrease in snow to rain ratio. Some of the things that have been predicted at a Sierra Nevada wide scale, and I think we're all pretty aware of this, is that snowpack will dramatically diminish with only the highest peaks maintaining those historic levels of snow by mid-century. One of, I think, the most interesting pieces of information is just talking about the rise in elevation, so that snow line, and that's predicted to rise 980 feet for every 3.6 degree Fahrenheit change temperature. So once we increase to about 7.2 degrees Fahrenheit, areas below 6,560 feet are projected to be snow-free. And so this, is likely to have a lot of impacts in our future snowpack. Okay, so I mentioned that we sort of dive into talking about drought. And so this is some of the, I think, really neat stuff within CalAdapt, where you can start to dig into simulated drought, and you can also start to look at the impacts of all of these changes in temperature, precipitation, and snowpack, and how they're affecting, fire and things like that. So this is one example of where you can look at a mid-century dry spell in the early century and then the late century. And this is only using that HADGEM. So I mentioned earlier, if you can recall that figure, the HADGEM is sort of our dry bookend. So that's where we have a decrease in precipitation and a greater increase in temperature. And so you can see here, this is modeled in both of the upper watershed and then the lower watershed. And so it's represented early and late century. And so it essentially predicts those changes in all of those key climate metrics, such as average maximum temperature, average minimum temperature, precipitation, snow water equivalent, and then it also estimates some, key hydrological impacts. And so, not surprising if, we simulate a dry spell similar to, what we've been seeing in the past drought that we just experienced. You can see that there's, marked increases in temperature, both minimum and maximum, decreases in precip, substantial decreases in snow water equivalent, which obviously will affect base flow and runoff. So, really, the take home message from a lot of this drought simulation is that, our droughts are predicted to be more extensive and more intense. Okay, so one of the things that I mentioned is that you can start to look at hydrology, and I just pulled this out as an example. And this is looking at, I believe this is this is actually looking at the Yuba River at Smartville. So one of the things is that you can do in CalAdapt is actually select particular locations where you want to look at stream flow or some either hydrological metric. And this, I think it's just looking at the RCP 8.5 here in this example and total annual unimpaired flows in a water year. And so one of the things that you can note, this is those two bookend climate models once again, the wetter and the drier. And you can see that as we start to get out into the later century, our stream flow decreases substantially underneath that drier climate scenario. So it's really, I think, interesting how you can sort of dive into looking at specific locations and starting to model hydrology. Okay, so also I think another really neat thing you can do is look at fire. And so this was essentially derived from a lot of the work that Westerling has done in the past, looking at Sierra Nevada wide, California wide, Western wide. And this really sort of brings it down to looking at specific watersheds. And so here, once again, we looked at this from a watershed perspective. And so we have the upper and the lower, and you could look at average annual area burned. And it also provides a couple of aggregate measures, minimum, average, and maximum. And then you can also look at those two RCP scenarios. And so I think, one take home message in really both of the watersheds is that, moving into mid and late century, there's an increase in the acres burned. And so I think, so for an example, in the lower Middle Fork American River watershed, the historical averages have been about 1,500 acres burning annually. And that's projected to increase to about 3,000 acres burning annually by the end of the century. In the higher elevation watershed, those annual averages historically have been about 1,500. And they're predicted to increase or projected to increase upwards of 2,000 to 2,500 acres by the end of the century. So, it doesn't seem like substantial increases, but I think if we think about, the increase in acres burned and the way those fires are burning, I think that's more relevant when we think about future impacts of climate change and fire. So I just wanted to bring in a couple of other things that are outside of the climate modeling world. And this is some really great work that Jim Thorne has been doing, trying to understand changes or impacts of climate and exposure on vegetation. And so this is just looking at the Tahoe National Forest. And once again, for this example, this is showing the warm and the wet, so that's CNRM climate projection, and it's under the higher emission scenario, so that 8.5. And then you can see that it has the current vegetation and then the three representative 30-year time periods. And here in the legend, you can see the level of exposure. So typically what we think is that areas considered to be highly climatically exposed are those in that 95%. So everything in the sort of orange and red colors. And so areas less than 80% are considered to be in climatically suitable conditions. And I will mention, and I think it's pointed out here, that this is only considering vegetation that's currently occupying that space. So it's not taking into account any potential vegetation shifts that we might experience because of climate. And so some of the take-home messages from this is that climate exposure, or the level of change expected on the Tahoe, ranges from about 11% in the early part of the century and up to 26% by the late end of the century. So, and that's under the drier or the wetter global climate model. And so I think, you know, if you consider that the HADGEM, the drier climate model, these numbers are, you know, greatly doubled. Okay, and one other thing I thought would be of interest to just point out to all of you is some of the meadow work that was done. So this is work that was done by Shana Gross and folks at DRI, where they essentially took the UC Davis meadow layer, and you know, I can drop the publication in the chat when I'm finished. And they pulled all that information together, and you could look at current exposure of meadows, and you can also look at future exposure. And this is just one example of the future exposure of meadows across the Tahoe National Forest. And these are only those that are within the UC Davis meadow layer. And so based on this figure here, you can see the red are those meadows that are high exposure, ranging down to the green that are low exposure. And so within the Tahoe National Forest, meadows are projected to have a high 18% to medium 67% exposure in the future projections. And this, you know, there's a lot more that goes into this. So I, you know, encourage you to sort of dive into and, you know, reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about these tools specifically focused on meadows. But they really sort of provide information and combine meadow sensitivity and exposure, as well as adaptive capacity to really evaluate future vulnerability to changes within those meadow systems. And with that, that's all the slides that I have for you today. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a background of the climate change trend summaries. Like I mentioned, they're 70, 80-page documents, so there's a lot of information in there. There's also a lot of literature that if folks are interested, they can dive more into. So I think if there's any time for questions, I could take them. And if not, my contact information is included in the presentation that I can share with you guys however you want me to.
Perfect. Yes, I was going to ask if you could share them with me, and then I can share them in the meeting notes and host them on our website as well. Thank you so much, Becky. Yeah, no kidding. Those are hefty documents, so I really appreciate you, you know, taking time to communicate them this morning. Okay.
Yeah, and that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you. And yeah, it was just a small piece of it. So I think if folks dive more into it and have questions or suggestions for us on how to make them better, please reach out to me.
Wow, that's awesome. Okay, any questions? I'll open it up.
Not a question for you, Becky, but again, another great presentation. Awful pessimistic, I feel, and really illustrates the importance of the work we're trying to do in the watershed to try and mitigate some of the worst of what's coming at us. But, you know, thank you for that.
Yeah, I think the resources that you pointed us to are going to be immensely helpful. I was not even familiar with CalAdapt, so I'm going to dive into that first, I think. And often with these grants that are coming up, they ask you to elaborate on how your project will, you know, help with climate change or address climate change in some way or another. So this is also, please keep this in mind when you're writing that part of your grant or whatever. I think this would be really helpful, a really helpful resource.
Yeah, and I will throw out there that, you know, if you want to geek out on like R code and, you know, creation of figures, I'm also happy to do that and share all that information with you guys. So if you're like evaluating a project, we could share all that we built into the climate scenario, and you can just use it and it'll make things a lot easier.
I love that. I have a question. I'm assuming, are you hooked into the Sierra Meadows partnership, and did they use that meadow data you were talking about in one of your last slides?
Yeah, I know, you know, Shana's been involved with the Meadow Partnership. While she's been gone, Kyle Merriam on the Sierra Cascade has been tied into that. And yes, I'm not sure how much they're pulling that information in, but I know they're aware of it, and I'm assuming it's fitting in wherever necessary. So yeah, great suggestion though.
Figured we should see some snow in the backdrop after that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Becky.
I was just gonna say, talking about climate is never uplifting, I feel like. I mean, I try not to make it too doom and gloom, but I mean, it's, you know, the potential reality of the future. So.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's just processing. But yeah, if anything, I hope this was motivating. And thanks again. I think I'm going to let us keep thinking about everything we just learned, and I'll pass it on to Kate of Bear Yuba Land Trust, who is our next speaker. And she's going to go over some current projects for Bear Yuba Land Trust, and I'm going to share her slides. And can everyone see that okay?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Take it away, Kate.
Okay, thanks for the setup, Mary, and for the presentation, Becky. Awesome. So I'm the stewardship manager for Bear Yuba Land Trust, and I oversee our preserves, so our properties that we own in fee title. And we own 10 preserves outright, and we have multiple restoration projects going on in these preserves, which is what I'll be talking about today. But for those of you not familiar with the organization, I'll kind of dive into that first. So to date, Bear Yuba Land Trust has protected over 18,000 acres of lands, and that's lands that we own and hold the title to, and conservation easements, which are partnerships with private landowners. So if you don't know what a conservation easement is, it's the legal document, and Bear Yuba Land Trust holds those documents, and they run with the title report. And it's a way for private landowners to protect their properties that have certain conservation values. So they would come to the land trust with a property that they wanted to protect. We'd assess it, and if it's a good fit, we record a conservation easement on the property and go out every year and monitor the property at certain photo points and make sure those conservation values are being upheld. We also work on a ton of trail projects. We have 45 miles of trails that we've built and maintained near Grass Valley and Nevada City, and a lot of ongoing projects, Sugarloaf being a big one this year that we're working on. We have 10 preserves comprising 4,000 acres of land that we own and manage. That's a big part of what I do. And one of our largest preserves is 2,700 acres, Rice's Crossing Preserve, which is by Dobbins and Bullard's Bar Reservoir. You can go ahead, Mary, please. Thanks. So I just wanted to give kind of big picture of our service area and where we work. Our service area is thousands of acres wide, ranging from blue oak woodland at 300 feet in elevation, all the way up to Grouse Ridge Wilderness at 8,000 feet in elevation. And this image is taken from our conservation green print, which we've been working on last year and this year. And it's just kind of our future plan for where we want to do conservation work, how we want to work. And we broke our service area into these 4 regions because of the different ecosystem services and land uses and history that's going on in the Bear and Yuba River watersheds. So there's different values and ecosystem services in blue oak woodland than there is, say, in Grouse Ridge headwaters area. So we have different strategies, land acquisition strategies, and management strategies going on for each of these regions. And if you're interested in the green print, you can expect that to be drafted and produced later this year. It'll probably be posted to our website if you want to take a peek at that. It's just all about future plans of BYLT and where we're going in the years ahead. Next slide, please, Mary. So today we're going to just take a dive into 3 projects that we have going on for this year that are at the preserves that we own and hold fee title to. So we have quite a few restoration projects going on, but I just picked 3 of them, 2 of them being forest thinning projects, and then one is a large wetland restoration project that's at a little lower elevation. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the Yuba Rim Trail Fuel Reduction Project, which we just completed about a week ago, and that's at Rice's Crossing Preserve. So if you can see it on my little map on the right, Yuba Rim Trail is located in that yellow icon just south of Bullard's Bar Reservoir. It's a beautiful property if you've never been there. A variety of different habitats and a great trail to hike, and there's not usually too many people on it. Some equestrian users, some mountain bikers and hikers, but it's one of my favorite trails. I recommend it if you've never been. So that preserve is our biggest. It's 2,700 acres along the Middle Yuba River, and we have a 2-mile trail segment, which is the Yuba Rim Trail, and then it continues a steeper trail down to the actual river, but the main section that everyone hikes is about 2 miles. The property history, it's been logged multiple times in the past. They actually employed helicopter logging because it's pretty steep in those canyons. It's had multiple wildfires in the past, as recently as 2009 and 2010, which burned about 60% of the properties. And the habitat is predominantly montane hardwood conifer and chaparral, really dense tan oak and Douglas fir, and some incense cedar. And we had a forest management plan drafted for this property in 2019. And that's where we drew a lot of the information for this project as far as what we wanted to focus on for forest health and fire risk and safety. Next slide. So that graph on the left is taken from the forest management plan. That's just telling us the stand distribution and age class, that a majority of trees on site out of that 2,700 acres are below 4-inch DBH. So smaller, dense trees. That picture on the right is from the beginning of the trailhead. It's a ponderosa pine plantation that was planted after that area had burned in 2009, but not a lot of variety in that stand, and a lot of dead branch and understory that got thinned out. So that's a before thinning picture. You can go ahead. Great. So for this project, we had some additional funding left over from California Natural Resources Agency from their River Parkways grant funding, and had about 50,000 left over after our trail improvement projects, and we were kind of deciding what we wanted to do with that money, and we really thought it would be great to do forest thinning along this trail because of the dense forest and improvements in forest health needed. So we worked with Red Mountain Resources, and the work was completed last month with a crew of about 10 people in 7 days, and they were using chainsaws and pole saws and a track chipper on about half of the property where the slopes weren't too steep. And then they created piles for the remainder of the property, about 150 6-foot piles that will need to burn once they dry out on approximately a mile of trail. And for environmental review, our considerations were avoiding working in wet conditions. We had a 150-foot stream buffer zone, although we only had one ephemeral channel within the entire project area. And then we avoided working outside of the bird nesting window, which begins February 15th. So some of the goals on this project were to reduce the chance of wildfire emanating from around the trail, and to increase forest resilience if wildfire did enter the area, meaning that a fire might burn less intense around the trail and preserve some of the trail if a fire did come through the area. Another goal of the project was to prevent loss of wildlife habitat or stand replacing fire by making the forest more resilient. And this research recently came out, a U.S. Forest Service article that some of you may have seen about spotted owl habitat and forest restoration positively impacting spotted owl nesting areas because of the avoidance of stand replacing fire in areas that had had some forest restoration. And one of the last goals of the project was that we wanted to improve the visitor experience out here. It's a lot more aesthetically pleasing to hike through a thinned out forest where you can see in front of you and have some vista points. So that was another goal of ours. So this is a map of the project. We had 3 priority areas, with red being the highest priority, really dense tan oak stands, ensign cedar, Douglas fir in there. And then orange was that ponderosa pine plantation, about 30-year-old age class plantation in there. Really homogeneous, not a lot of diversity. And then the yellow section, we get on top of an old logging road. So it's a little bit more open chaparral habitat. They actually did not get to treating that section. That was lowest priority. They said they estimated it would take about 7 days for the project, and that's about exactly what it took to get through the first red and orange priority sections. So that yellow section will have to be treated with other grant funding at a later date. Another project. Next slide. Are you there, Mary?
Yes, sorry, there must be some
there
delay.
might be a delay on my end. Sorry.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that.
No, you're good. I figured it was probably my computer. So now for the good stuff, the action shots of the thinning actually going on. You can see one of the workers in the background with his orange helmet there. I'm standing on the trail taking the picture where there's 3 logs are kind of lined up. And this is one of the dense tan oak stands where they were working in. And they did not take the track chipper through this section. This is where they ended up doing a bunch of piling. Next shot. Yeah, my computer is really lagging. There we go. Okay. That tells you about how long my delay is. So this is where they actually ran the track chipper, which was about half the project area where the slopes weren't too bad. And they just spread the mulch on both sides of the trail and cleaned up the trail corridor for us. Go to the next image, which is just of some of the piles. Yeah, about 150 piles, lots to be burned next year once it dries out. And they did a great job leaving some trees and thinning the understory and just making it more open and resilient. And we ended up flagging a few madrones and dogwoods and some of the species diversity that we wanted to capture. But a majority of what they took was ponderosa pines. They limbed a lot of ponderosa pines, and then tan oak was the other species they predominantly thinned. And then that's one of the vista points that they created. There was sort of 2 natural openings that were already there that they just opened up to about 100 feet, but nice little overlooks for the public. So next project is in Nevada City, about 1 mile actually from Nevada City. It's Deer Creek Park Fuels Reduction Project, and a mouthful to say. So this is a partnership with a private landowner and developer who we have a working forest conservation easement, as well as recorded trail easement for the public to come. There's a lot of residents who frequent the trails in here. This is also a major the DS Canal runs through here. Nevada Irrigation District has a lot of infrastructure and canals within this area. Let's see, so the size of the project, this is 330 acre conservation easement. And a portion of this project area is previously treated with CAL FIRE, California Forest Improvement, or the CFIP program. So last year, the CFIP program was working in there. So part of the area has already been treated. We received $800,000 in funding from them, and the remaining area is being treated this year with funding from Sierra Nevada Conservancy. We received about $700,000 in funding to treat the remainder of the project from SNC. So this is just a map, a visual of the project area, a mile east of Nevada City and west of Scotts Flat Reservoir, 330 acres. And those purple points are just our photo monitoring points that we visited last year. So some goals for this project, really a focus on safer communities, being that it's within the WUI and 1 mile of Nevada City and there's really dense residential housing. That was one of the main goals, was just improving the fire safety for the surrounding communities with this project. Improving forest health, making the forest more resilient in this area. We also wanted to prep this area and will do prescribed fire under CAL FIRE's vegetation management program. And another large goal of this project was to protect the water infrastructure in Nevada Irrigation District canals that run all through this preserve. And the last goal was to improve recreational use. The trails in here receive quite a bit of use from the residents around here, so improving the aesthetics of this area was another goal. Is forest similar to Rice's Crossing Preserve, dense montane hardwood conifer. As I mentioned, a variety of public trails that are in the preserve and high density residential area as well. So the project calls for mastication and commercial biomass thinning on up to 320 acres. I mentioned a portion of the area has been treated under the CFIP program last year, and the remaining is being treated this year under SNC. We're working with FRST Corporation. They have a team of registered professional foresters that are leading the project. And another piece of this project is a public education campaign that we're working with UC Cooperative Extension to lead forester-led walks and putting up educational panels along the trails to explain the importance of forest health and fire-safe communities. Okay, so the last project, which I'll just go over quickly, I think I'm running about time, is Garden Bar Wetland Restoration Project, which is located at about 400 feet in elevation just east of Camp Far West Reservoir. This is a teaming project with Wildlife Conservation Board, who also helped to acquire the 650-acre preserve. And this project, you can go to the next slide, please, is along Little Wolf Creek. Don't know what happened to my text there, it got a little condensed. So we received $230,000 from Wildlife Conservation Board to improve a half-mile segment of Little Wolf Creek through constructing beaver dam analogs, which is just a fancy way of saying we put in rock weirs and woody dam to restore the hydrology in the creek and cause the water to spill out along the floodplain on a 1.5 mile segment. Another big part of this project was excluding cattle from coming into the riparian area and further degrading it and eating the plants that we were installing. So we constructed a 3.5-acre fence to exclude cattle as well as wild pigs. We've done a ton of invasive species removal, Himalayan blackberry, bullfrogs, crayfish, Medusa head, you name it, it's out there. And then right now we're kind of in the process of a huge planting effort and native grass seeding with plugs and using a harrow, native wildflowers, and then just a ton of wetland shrubs and riparian plants. So we just started planting in December and that'll go into 2023. This is an image of the 37 structures that were put in the creek, the rock weirs and woody debris jams. You can go to the next slide. I think it's another visual of the same thing. Yeah, so that's just an example of the rock weir, and then the rock weir causing the water to spill out in some of these backwater channels and reactivating the floodplain in areas where it's been disconnected for a number of years. There's a lot of sediment buildup that's occurred over time, and we are just forcing the water to move into different pathways and reconnect water back into the floodplain so that we have more areas to plant riparian trees and shrubs and wetland plants. I think I went over most of this now, but our fence is up. We've been treating invasive species for 2 years. We're still working on that. That'll be an ongoing process, and we're now in our planting phase. And this project is being led by us with the help of volunteers. It's a massive effort. We're putting in 3,000 plants in 2 years and 45 species of native plants. So planting will go on into 2023. You're looking for volunteer opportunities, look at our website. We're always needing help on this project. And yeah, it's a good time. I think that was my last slide. Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining and for participating. That's an image of Deer Creek. My friend flew her drone over Deer Creek Park Preserve. So I will leave you with that pretty sunset.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. And thanks for your patience with the delay there. Great slide.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so great to hear more, kind of get these deep dives into what organizations in the region are doing. So I really appreciate you doing that. And my first question is, I would love to go on a forester-led walk. So whenever those happen, please let us know, and I can help get the word out if those are available for the public.
Yes, yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, I will absolutely let you know about those dates.
Awesome. Yeah, and any other volunteer opportunities. I'm happy to, and this goes for everyone, happy to host that on our webpage and our calendar and our newsletters. We like to send out, spotlights here and there. So yeah, happy to do that. Okay, does anyone have any questions for Kate? Well, thanks for not shouting over each other. Very respectful. And she shared her contact information. And then Kate, if I can share those slides with that too, that would be great. So if people do want to reach out.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Kate, oh, hi. I actually have a quick question. Hi, I'm Erin. I'm the new forest ecologist with Sierra Streams Institute. Hey. Yes,
Hey.
I've been actually doing some research into the Cal VTP program to get CEQA covered. And I'm just wondering, so you mentioned that you had that with one of your projects?
Yeah, Deer Creek Park Forest, which I just know that from reading some background. I did not have any involvement in that or the process of it. That was last year and the year before, I think, even before I came on, but I can find out more details about that and how we went about that if you're interested.
Oh, okay. No worries. Yeah, I don't want to make you do a bunch of extra work. I was just curious if you knew off the top of your head, okay, how did you qualify for that? I'm just really interested in identifying a lead agency for a project we have going on. So, but thank you. And also those projects look really cool.
Yeah, great.
Oh,
thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see, I don't know, it's exciting to see implementation, and so much in our region, I feel like we're seeing an emphasis on landscape scale projects, which I think is super important, but I also at the same time think we still have to empower these smaller projects where you can 7 days getting a lot of work done, like that's really impressive. So yeah, I love to see it and see kind of this concurrent, like small scale, large scale action happening for our Yuba forests, as I call them.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well, Becky had to run, but I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to our speakers. I really appreciate it. If anyone is here today and is interested in speaking in the future, you are welcome to let me know, or I'll bug you and reach out myself. And then also if there's anyone in particular, any topic you'd like to hear, you can also let me know. So I've got fun news for you all for our next section, which was breakout groups. For some reason, I don't see the option on my Zoom account at the moment, but lucky, so you might have dodged that. But I do just want to take a moment. So I did have a prompt, and since our group today has gotten smaller as time's gone on, I'll just share that with you all now, and you can respond in the chat or out loud. We have a little time, and we also can end a little early. But my prompt is, since it's 2022, I know it's already February, but it's still the new year. I'd love to hear from you all a forest health goal that you have for the region. It can be local, it can be regional, it can be for your organization or personal, but and it, it can be, say, you can tell me how many acres you want gone, or if it's more supportive, your role you'd hope to see. And I think some people might recognize we just did this in another meeting, at another meeting I had this week. But anyway, so I'd love to hear that. And I'll open the floor first if anyone wants to jump in and share their forest health goal for the region.
Well, I don't want to write everything out. So we have a lot going on in the Yuba River Ranger District. We're looking at getting the North Yuba Landscape Project draft environmental impact statement done by the end of this, by this fall. So that's a project area of 250,000 acres in the North Yuba watershed. We've got 1,200 acres of hardwood culturing going on out at Pindola, so next to Bullards Bar Reservoir. We received the Wildlife Conservation Board hardwood culturing grant. That's affecting Trapper. That's another 1,200 acres. The Nature Conservancy is looking at helping us out in the Red Ant and Gold project areas on an understory burn, about 800 acres. Oh, we have Yuba project burning that's set up for 2,000 acres, assuming the weather and wildfire season don't conspire against us as they have for the last 2 years. We're looking at a forest health and resilience thinning project as part of the Trapper project. So that'll be sold or transferred actually to another partner, National Forest Foundation. Those next 2 units that'll be going forward are Graveyard and Slayville. Slayville, S-L-E-I-G-H, not S-L-A, and keeping with the theme of Graveyard. But those were the landmarks that were out there when we made the timber sale. Western Nevada Community Defense Project, we got a combined grant in partnership with Nevada County Fire Safe Council of about $5 million for work in the Deer Creek drainage area. What else going on? Campground hazard trees, Highway 20 Green Acres Forest Health and Resilience Project. That's up Highway 49 for 1,100 acres surrounding the Green Acres community, kind of next to the Yuba project. And then Caltrans through Cal OES. I still don't understand how all of this is going to play out, as almost $30 million for work on federal, other public land that's not federal, and private land for roadside clearance along highways 49, 20, and 89. So you can imagine Sierra County is pretty interested in that. That's looking at clearing around 100 to 400 feet either side of those roads, just depending what makes sense. I believe it's smaller diameter material. Whole lot to come out on that, because I'm not the one that has anything to do with it at this point in time, but still pretty exciting to see happening in our area. PG&E is putting together a fuel break along their lines up in the Cal-Ida area. And I could probably come up with some other things, but it's a busy year on the Yuba district. That's just one district. There's 3 other districts on this forest, and we're all just as busy. So looking forward to some great things. Now you know why I didn't want to write it out in the chat.
Thank you so much for that district-wide update and beyond. Thank you, Lon. Appreciate it. I did my best to capture that in the notes. All right, Chris, what you got?
We've a fair bit of work going on around the South Fork Yuba. Well, because there's the North Yuba partnership, which is dealing with North Fork, but on the South Fork, we've been supporting the Yuba Watershed Institute on work on the ridge above, the San Juan Ridge area, the Inman Forest. We have a couple different planning projects along South Yuba, which we hope in the next year or so to get, transition to implementation projects, working with partners in the Nevada City, working Deer Creek Canyon below Nevada City. And I think that's mostly what we've got going on, working with NID, Nevada Irrigation District, and hopefully other partners in the river fire restoration. So.
Great. NID just shared that the river fire restoration polygons. So I'm going to add that to the stakeholder map if anyone wants to learn more about where exactly that will be. Okay, don't make me call on you because I will.
Yeah, this is Eric Sweet with Sierra Pacific. Just wanted to relay our plans for this year in the Yuba watershed as a whole. Most of what we're trying to do this year is to stay ahead of the bugs that are traveling up the hill. It seems like a lot of the lower elevation areas are getting hit pretty hard right now. And so we're trying to, that's starting to progress up into the timber, commercial timber ground. And so we're trying to be aggressive at trying to stop those bugs from progressing up further into the timberland up drainage. So that's one of our main focuses this year. And then hopefully going in the next couple of years, we'll be doing a lot more fuel reduction projects and installing more fuel breaks. But right now we're just trying to stop the advance of those bugs. And hopefully we get another continued with more rain this year and maybe some cold weather and help control that bug population, because it's starting to, in some areas, it's starting to look like the early stages of what it looked like down south in 2016. So I hope we don't get there, but that's one of our goals for this year.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. So you mean like bark beetles? Is that the main concern or anything in particular?
Yeah, so it's the western pine beetle. And so there's a lot of pine stands that are, especially right now where we're seeing the worst of it's down. It's kind of outside of this group's area, but it's marching up the hill there around Brownsville and kind of west of Bullard's Bar. And there's a big expansion in the Forest Hill Divide area. And then for us, it started kind of down Celestial Valley area, and it's moving up Oregon Creek, kind of between the middle and the North Yuba, up Pliocene Ridge. So that's where our focus is for the Yuba area, is on that Pliocene Ridge. And it's large, expansive stands that are dead and dying, and the bugs are still active. And we've seen some bug flight activity at the lowest elevations in the 2,500 to 3,000 foot range that the bugs are moving right now, which is not a good sign. So hopefully the weather changes here, and maybe it'll kill a lot of them.
And we just had a question in the chat. I don't know the answer, if pine beetles are resilient to any type of fire or smoke or prescribed burning.
No, they're not. So yeah, if they're burrowed in the bark, the smoke's not going to affect them. But if they're traveling and moving, and they'll the smoke will impact them and kill them, especially the heat. If there's enough heat in the fire, generally, if it's going to kill the bugs, it's going to kill the tree as well. So it's not a good necessarily method to control the bugs, other than it can, with a good burn, reduce some of the competition of the trees to make them healthier, to be able to push out the bugs when they get attacked. It's one of those things. Prescribed fire is more of a preventative before the bugs ever get there.
Yeah, Eric's point there, and overstocked forest is really the key point. If when it's overstocked, the trees are automatically stressed for lack of moisture, and that gives the beetles their opportunity.
Well, great to hear you're hoping to get ahead of that. Let us know how we can support you. Any other updates from anyone that they'd like to share, or goals? Allison, I'm sorry, I have to put you on the spot. It was in YubaNet. It looked like the Yuba Watershed Fire Protection Council got some funding. Can you give us an update on that?
Sure, yes. Yeah, you called me out, Mary. I was just trying to think through all that. We have so many projects going on right now. We're launching soon. But yeah, the PISA was in YubaNet. So we are applying for a CAL FIRE fire prevention grant next week to do about a little over 1,000 acres of roadside clearing in the Dobbins Organ House area, and it's actually going to be kind of a extended buffer, so it'll be up to 150 feet on county roads and 30 feet on private roads, which is more than we've been able to do in the past. And so basically what was in YubaNet there was Yuba Water Agency approved a cost share match for us in support of that grant. So if we are awarded the CAL FIRE grant, Yuba Water Agency will also provide support to, that's going to go toward like project management, hiring a forester to really oversee that project, because it's going to be big and complex, as so many of these projects are, right? But yeah, so we're excited. We're excited to get that grant application in and done, and then hopefully, based on the results, we'll be excited to kick that off. That's, if you want me to, I can launch into some of our other projects too. If you want to hear all that.
That's great. No, thank you so much. Congrats on getting that cost share approved, and fingers crossed for the grant to come through as well. And I'll just share briefly. So if you're not aware, there's another kind of spin-off of the Yuba Forest Network called Forest Labs. And it's something that Jeff Lauder of Sierra Streams Institute really spearheaded and facilitated over the year. It's a kind of a casual scientific reading group. We've met at Grass Valley Brewing Company typically in the past after work, and we'll read the same forest research related paper and talk about it. And often it leads to us talking about how we think we can apply it to our work. It's really fun. It's kind of been reignited. Our January session, we had the most participants we've had in a while, so that was really exciting. I'm going to be organizing our February meeting, so if you're interested in joining our group, please reach out to me and I can add you to the email list. It's a really good time, and it really does feel like connection and community while also learning from each other. So wanted to give a little shout out to that, and hoping to just continue fostering things like that is one of my goals.
Yeah, I just wanted to also do a shout out for that, or just say, yeah, I agree. Hopefully we could see some of you there at the Forest Labs meeting. It's really, it is a great opportunity to network with folks. And I'll just share a couple of project updates That's okay. So two things that SSI has going on. So one is, so we're contracted through the Yuba Watershed Institute to do forest resiliency treatments or field treatments on 260 acres. And it's kind of a mishmash of different ownership. So there's an archery range, or there's a sportsman's club there. And then there's also private land. And then there's the Woodpecker Reserve area. And so we're charged with writing a forest management plan for them. And then another project is through the Wildlife Conservation Board. And so there's several schools. So the Woolman School, there's the Firewise community, but there's also the Shady Creek School, School of the Arts. And so our education department is working with, I think it's 5th and 6th graders, to collect data on that land. And then we'll ultimately take that data and collect additional data and make forest management plans based on that. So it's a great opportunity to get involvement from students as well as local Firewise communities. And then it's up to them to do the implementation. So yeah, there's some exciting projects here.
Fantastic, Erin. Thanks for sharing. We're really excited that you joined the force here. It's awesome. Well, I'm inclined to let us go unless there's anyone else who'd like to share. I won't force you. I will say our next meeting is scheduled for May 6th. And I'll be sending out agenda as we get closer. And I really hope to see you there and at other community meetings like this one. But yeah, just last chance if anyone would like to share. All right. Well, look out for the meeting notes. You'll probably get them Monday or maybe today. Thank you all so much for being here and spending your Friday morning with us and showing up and ready to participate. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and we'll be in touch.